announcements. Of course, I'm going to beat this one into the ground until Sunday because I'm so excited. The Life of Yeshua series is in 2 days. Hey. I'm so excited. If you haven't signed up for it and you plan on coming, please go to the website and click that little RSVP button just so we know what's going on. More exciting news. We got more stuff in the shop. Yes. So the Satanist Sus hoodie is back. We got a kind of workout tank for the ladies that is on there. But this is what I'm more excited about because I just did this afternoon and I'm so excited. We have children's merch now. The shirt says "We are Torah Tots," and I was like, cute. So yeah. So we have it in. We have like baby stuff, toddler stuff, and kids apparel on there now. So I was really excited about that. We have that, and then we have just some cool other merch too. So we got. I did a notebook and a 517 stainless steel water bottle. So keep looking out because I'm gonna keep adding more stuff. I felt like I hadn't added any stuff in a while, so I made up for it today and just added a bunch of stuff. Last but not least, as always, Venmo. If you feel led, that's right. I'm just gonna let you do announcements from now on. If you feel led to give, the Lord's put on your heart to give, we do have a Venmo account, and we appreciate all the generous donations. All right, let's get into the portion. This week's portion is Beshalach. Beshalach. Yep, and after he had let go. So we're going to be Exodus 13, 17, where we left off last week, going through chapter 17 till the end. And it's going to be a really cool portion. It's there's some neat things, there's some things you probably already knew, and then the Lord took me on some rabbit trails this week that we're going to kind of run down and kind of look at a few different things too, which are pretty cool. So to recap, so we saw Yah sending all these plagues. Then last week we saw the finalization of that. We saw the locust. We saw the darkness on Egypt, and we said it was a darkness you could feel, and we talked about how that related to it was actually like evil in the land. Moses warns of the death of the firstborn. Yah gives them the ordinance of the Passover. At midnight, Yah came and struck down the firstborn. And it was anyone who had not followed the ordinance of the Passover. So if they followed the instructions and put the blood on the doorpost, guess what? They did.
Did they tell the Egyptians to do that too?
But there was probably some in the land that were like, "What are you doing?" Remember we talked.
They asked about it.
Yeah, and we talked about those that join themselves to Israel get counted into the covenant. So I'm sure there was people after the all these plagues that were like, I don't know what your God is doing, but I want to be a part of that. And I bet I would almost bet you that they knew about this ordinance because they joined themselves to Israel.
Oh, it's just for 13.
What? Yes. I mean, we'll figure that out. Did everybody get their? Yeah, you got the papers. I was making sure. I forgot that a couple weeks ago. And then we talked about who was allowed to partake. Do you remember? Does anybody remember? Who was allowed to partake? Like who were the people of the Passover? It was those that had covenant to covenant. It was not the outsiders. It was the people who were natives and the people who were sojourners that had joined themselves to Israel. All right, so let's go into Exodus 13. We'll finish out this chapter real quick. And we'll keep moving on. So when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. So why did Yah take them on a different route?
They didn't get scared.
So they didn't get scared, that's true.
Didn't we say something about confusing Pharaoh? Like what was that in ours? I can't remember.
Yeah, you're on the right path.
Yeah, I mean confusing Pharaoh and like kind of giving him that they're wondering and they don't know where they can find him easy.
I know you'll see. We're going to talk about that Yeah. One, I really think he wanted to teach them to rely on him. So he didn't go the main way, and because the easy way out of Egypt was the King's Highway. The King's Highway would have gone up out of Egypt, and that would have been the easiest way. That would have been the main trade route between all of the lands, would have been the King's Highway. But the King's Highway was controlled by Pharaoh.
Right. I'm sure it was guarded and...
So, well, not only that, but this would have looked like they were leaving under Pharaoh's power if they would have taken the King's Highway. So first off, we see Yah's like, I don't want it to look like this is Pharaoh's doing. I want to make sure that this is my doing.
How do we know this?
Because if you look at the ancient trade routes, like the way that there was a path that led, and you'll see it in a minute when I pull up the, I have a picture when we talk about the crossing, and I'll show you what we're talking about with this King's Highway. But this is also the same thing we talked about back in Genesis when we talked about Abraham left Ur and then traveled to all these different places. That route he took was the King's Highway. The King's Highway ran all the way from where we think of Babylon. It went up and then came down through the land of Canaan all the way into Egypt. And there's also different branches of it that would have crossed the desert. There were easy trade routes for them to be able to easily access other places.
So, but the idea that you thought they think we're leaving under Pharaoh's power, is that conclusion, conjecture?
Yeah, so the King's Highway, historically, was at that time controlled by Egypt. So if you used the King's Highway, there would have been places along the way, checkpoints.
Checkpoints.
Yeah, that you would have had to check in and say, why are you on this highway?
Okay.
Kind of like we have tolls.
3 million of you coming in.
Yeah, why are 3 million of y'all on this? It's a little crazy. Verse 18, but God led the people around by the way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea. And the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt, equipped for battle. So why did they need to go through the wilderness? I'm not saying I have an answer for this. It's just a question to throw out there. Why would they need to go through the wilderness?
To get to the Red Sea.
By the way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea.
To follow previous patterns laid out in Scripture?
Patterns, yeah. I was also thinking cover. I was also thinking reliance on Yah. That if they're not going by the main routes, they're going through the wilderness. There's going to be a reliance on Yah needed there.
I mean, we always get closer to Him in our wilderness.
Absolutely.
So that.
So here's another thing that I brought up that I was reading. Ezekiel 20. We mentioned this a couple weeks ago. The Ezekiel 20. This is Ezekiel talks about this whole Egypt, Israel, Exodus, scattering of the tribes. Like this is the chapter of all that. And I said to them, cast away the detestable things. This is talking about Israel in Egypt. Your eyes feast on, every one of you, and do not defile yourselves with the idols of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. But they rebelled against me and were not willing to listen to me. None of them cast away the detestable things their eyes feasted on, nor did they forsake the idols of Egypt. Then I said I would pour out my wrath upon them and spend my anger against them in the midst of the land of Egypt. But I acted for the sake of my name, that it should not be profaned in the sight of the nations among whom they lived, in whose sight I made myself known to them in bringing them up out of the land of Egypt. So I led them out of the land of Egypt and brought them into the wilderness. I gave them my statutes and made known to them my rules, by which if a person does them, he shall live. So, reading this, knowing the story, it appears as if Yah bringing them into the wilderness was actually His mercy, because He did not fulfill what He originally said He wanted to do, which was just strike them. He said, no, for my name's sake, I'm not going to do that. And then instead, He just takes them into the wilderness. So they have to rely on Him.
I wish we could see where it was He did that to them in Egypt. Like when He tried to get them to turn while they were in Egypt and they rejected it.
Oh, yeah.
Things the Bible doesn't tell us.
I know, right? Back to the portion. But God led the people around by the way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea, and the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt equipped for battle. I thought that was interesting, because he didn't take them by the way of the Philistines, because he was worried about them being scared of seeing war.
But he still hasn't
But
equipped.
he still has them equipped. And some translations say, I think, in fives. There's one translation that says in fives, and it basically is alluding to like military divisions, the way they were ranked as they went out. Exodus 12:51. It was on that very day that Adonai brought Israel out of the land of Egypt as armies. We just read this last week. So again, he's showing them and putting them in like armies, but he's not taking them by the way that they may see war. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones with you from here. And they moved on from Succoth and encamped at Etham on the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, that they may travel by day and by night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from before the people. Any question on chapter 13? That was just kind of the wrap up from where we left off last week. No. All right, Exodus 14. Can somebody read 1 through 8? Who wants to read?
1 through 8. Gotcha.
1 through 8.
Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the people of Israel to turn back and encamp in front of Pihahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. In front of Baal Zephon, you shall encamp facing it by the sea. For Pharaoh will say to the people of Israel, they are wandering in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his host, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. And they did so. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the mind of Pharaoh and his servants was changed toward the people, and they said, what is this we have done? What is this we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us? So he made ready his chariot, and took his army with him, and took 600 chosen chariots, and all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the people of Israel, while the people of Israel were going out defiantly.
So, this word defiantly at the end of here is, in some translations it says with a high hand. I think the King James says with a high hand. And what's interesting about this is this word means be exalted. It can also mean bold. And it has both a positive and a negative meaning to the same word. So depending on the context that you put it in, determines whether or not it's positive or negative. So, this is what it made me think of this. If Yah exalts, so we're looking at this word high hand, to be exalted. So if Yah exalts, it's good. But what if Yah didn't do the exalting? What would that be called?
Pride.
Pride. Exactly. It's pride. So in this instance, it's almost looking as if they're going out, because the translators translate it defiantly, in the negative sense of this word. So if they exalted themselves, they're going out defiantly. There may be a little bit of pride involved now. They're like, Pharaoh, we told you our God was good. Yeah, we're going out. Deuteronomy chapter 9. After Adonai your God has driven them out from before you, do not say in your heart, this is later on in Torah, it is because of my righteousness that Adonai has brought me in to possess the land. And this is in reference to when they're getting ready to go into the promised land. But same basis on leaving Egypt, going into the promised land. Same principle. It is because of the wickedness of these nations that Adonai is driving them out before you. It is not by your righteousness or the uprightness of your heart that you're going in to possess their land. Rather, because of the wickedness of these nations, Adonai your God is driving them out from before you, in order to keep the word of Adonai swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. So you should understand that it is not because of your righteousness that Adonai your God is giving you this good land to possess. For you are a stiff... How many times has God called them a stiff-necked people?
Quite a few.
Remember, never forget how you provoked Adonai your God to wrath in the wilderness. From the day you left the land of Egypt, they've already started provoking him, until you came to this place. You have been rebellious against Adonai. Alright, let's continue on in the portion. Verse. Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting that the exact same concept that, like, with salvation, right? Through Yeshua.
Yeah.
You didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Like, literally. It's like, he could describe us as the same way. We're stiff-necked, we're hard-hearted, like, we don't want to be there. There's one scripture that talks about we had animosity towards him even before he saved us.
Yeah,
we
yeah.
want to be saved. You know, it's just, I love the parallels there.
Absolutely. Continuing on, verse 9, the Egyptians pursued them, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and his horsemen and his army, and overtook them, encamped at the sea by Pi-hahiroth in front of Baal-zephon. When Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt?" Already. Like, what? They're only like a few days maybe out. They're like, what in the world? Is it not what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. And Moses said to the people, "Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians who you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You have only to be silent." Anybody want to guess what this word in Hebrew is? It's translated salvation. You can't say. You don't know the answer. This word right here, and see the salvation of the Lord. Anybody want to guess? In Hebrew, the word for salvation.
Yes. I can't remember. Well. Really?
Yeshua.
Really? That's what
That
it
word
says?
is Yeshua.
That's what it says?
Yes, in Hebrew it says, "And see the Yeshua of the Lord."
Oh my gosh.
Right there. 1 Corinthians 10, 1-4. "For I do not want you to be ignorant, brothers and sisters, that our fathers were all under the cloud and passed through the sea. They were all immersed into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they were drinking from a spiritual rock that followed them. The rock was Messiah." So Messiah, Yeshua, was with them in the wilderness.
Things that make you go.
Mm-hmm.
See, and if you aren't reading Exodus, you don't know what that means.
Yeah. And actually, like, in a little bit, we're gonna see that they were complaining about not having water, and Moses strikes the rock, water comes. There's actually the midrashes that argue that rock was then carried with them where they went, and constantly had water coming out of a rock.
They're literally drinking rock.
Uh huh.
They're literally drinking rock. Okay.
Yep. We'll see it in just a minute. Yep. It happens twice. All right. Somebody want to read 15 through 20? 15 through 20.
I can.
Go ahead, Elizabeth. 15 through 20.
Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the people to get moving. Pick up your staff and raise your hand over the sea. Divide the waters so the Israelites can walk through the middle of the sea and on dry ground. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they will charge in after the Israelites. My great glory will be displayed through Pharaoh's heart and his troops, his chariots and his charioteers. When my glory is displayed through them, all Egypt will see my glory and know that I am Lord." Then the angel of God, who had been leading the people of Israel, moved to the rear of the camp. The pillar of cloud also moved from the front and stood behind them. The cloud settled between the Egyptian and Israelite camps. As darkness fell, the cloud turned to fire, lighting up the night. But the Egyptians and Israelites did not approach each other all night.
So, so I know we pick on the Prince of Egypt movie and all of its inaccuracies. I love this scene in that movie though, when you see them coming, the Egyptians coming in, the Israelites don't know what to do, and all of a sudden the fire just goes and gets in between them.
Yeah,
I like how it
surrounds
moves.
them.
Yeah, and so there's a fire that is between the Egyptians, preventing them from getting to them. Something else that's interesting that I heard in my studies this week, the place that they think this is at, they think they found this place, and it's actually like a gorge, and so there's only one way in and only one way out. So it would have been a very entrapping place for them to be. If you think of it from a military standpoint, it would have been the worst place in the world for them to be. On the offensive, it's a great spot. But for them, on the defense, it would have been a terrible place. But we see the cloud changing as the night sets into the fire, and then blocking the way from between the two of them. Such a cool picture. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. Does this sound familiar to anybody? Does this sound familiar?
Dividing the waters, you mean?
Genesis 1, 6 through 10. Then God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters. Let it be for separating water from water." So God made the expanse, and it separated the water that was from below the expanse from the water that was over the expanse. And it happened so. God called the expanse sky. So there was evening, there was morning a second day. Then God said, "Let the water below the sky be gathered to one place." And what appears? Dry ground. And it happened so. And so it's really interesting that the same thing that happened in Genesis, now he's separating water and causing dry land. Think about the bottom of a seabed. How long would the bottom of a seabed take to dry out to where it was actually dry land?
Yeah, there's a place that they think where it was crossing. This is one of these documentaries I've watched. That there's a hard substrate in that area, and they think they found sections of it.
Yeah.
Because now, with all the channels of shipping and everything have gone through there, they've dredged a lot of it out. There's still a couple spots that when low tide or when it waters down or whatever, you can see it's really hard ground.
Yeah.
So they think that could be a spot that was like a natural land bridge that was right there. And it's just a bridge.
Yeah. So we're gonna look at some other things with that too, because I found when we look at, there's a map we're gonna look at that I found that I was like, that challenges everything that I've ever thought about where they crossed, how they crossed. So we're going to get some more of that. Verse 22, "And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left." So that's interesting too, because there's a lot of myths about it was actually based on tides, it was based on this. Well, this scripture right here tells us that there was actually walls of water on both sides. So I was like, that's a good little piece of information. "The Egyptians pursued and went after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And in the morning watch, the Lord in the pillar of the fire and of cloud looked down on the Egyptian forces and threw the Egyptian forces into panic, clogging their chariot wheels so that they drove heavily. And the Egyptians said," this is crazy, "Let us flee from before Israel, for Yah fights for them against the Egyptians." I put Yah in there. The most translations say the Lord. Some will say Adonai. The Hebrew is Yod He Vav He. They were calling him by name when they were saying this. Look at that. I'm getting ahead of my slides. "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Stretch out your hand over the sea, that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen.' So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea turned to its normal course when the morning appeared. And as the Egyptians fled into it, the Lord threw the Egyptians into the midst of the sea." The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen, all of the host of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained. But the people of Israel walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great power that the Lord used against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. So, the parting of the waters and Israel walking through was a sign of the covenant, which is really interesting. So Genesis 15, and we should remember this from just a few months ago when we studied Genesis. And he brought him outside, he being Abraham, and said, "Look toward heaven and number the stars, if you are able to number them." Then he said to him, "So shall your offspring be." And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. And he said to him, "I am the Lord who brought you up out of Ur the Chaldees to give you this land to possess." But he said, "O Lord, how am I to know that I shall possess it?" He said to him, "Bring me a heifer 3 years old, a female goat 3 years old, a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon." And he brought him all these, cut them in half, and laid each half over against the other, but he did not cut the birds in half. And when the birds of prey came down on the carcass, Abraham drove them away. As the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram, and behold, dreadful and great darkness fell upon him. Then the Lord said to Abram, "Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs." He's telling Abram what is happening now that we're reading about. "And they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nations that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age. And they shall come back here in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. When the sun had gone down and it was dark, behold, a smoking firepot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant," remember this part, "with Abraham, saying, 'To your offspring I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river the Euphrates, and the land of the Canaanites, the Kenizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, all the ites.'" So historically, to cut covenant would have been two parties walking between two halves of a sacrifice. So who walked through the pieces in Genesis? We just read this. Who walked through? No. Nope. Abraham was asleep. So it says that the flaming torch and the smoking thing went through it. We talked about this in Genesis, that Yah, who just made this covenant with him, walked through the two pieces. But it was Yah and only Yah that walked through. So, was the covenant completed yet? The first half of the covenant had been started, but the second party hadn't. So, what initiated the covenant? Before he made the covenant, there's one thing that happened, right? It says that Abram believed, and it was counted to him as righteousness. So, not until he believed, then Yah told him what was going to happen. Then he set up the covenant and walked through it, putting his half of the covenant together. Right? Then we see the waters divided and the descendants of Abraham walking through, bringing the covenant full circle. And what's interesting is that then in verse 31, it says, "And they believed in Yah and in his servant Moses." So we see the covenant being brought full circle to where Yah walks through the covenant. Then finally, 400 years later, 500 or 600 years later, we see the children of Israel walking through the split and finishing that by saying they believed. That was they finally believed after everything. They finally believed. Does that make sense?
Which is still surprising that they finally believe. They just saw all the plagues in Egypt.
I never heard. Any questions on 14? Yeah, we're going to see how long their belief lasts, though.
So where do we get this idea that walking through the water brought the covenant full circle?
It's just a picture type. It's not necessarily It's not necessarily.
I didn't know if it was like one of the mid-raps.
No. It's just a picture type that we see splitting, Yah walking through, splitting, them walking through,
Them
and
And he's talking about the 400 years.
part of the
And
covenant
he's
was
talking
that,
about
yeah.
them Now.
And so, and then also we see later on in the New Testament too, they talk about them. We read in 1 Corinthians them being baptized. You know, it's a symbol of baptism as well. So it's the splitting of water, the splitting of something, and then walking through. So it's just a cool picture type. To think that it was never the covenant was never finished with Abram.
Yeah, he didn't ever walk.
He never walked through it. But if we talked about this last week too, that it had to follow a certain line. That covenant followed a certain line. He promised things to Abram and to Abraham, but the covenant of promise followed Isaac. Then it followed Jacob, Israel. Now Israel as a nation is kind of wrapping that covenant up. And then we're going to see how once they get out of that, now he's kind of sealed this covenant. Now they're going to get the terms. Now they're going to, all this other stuff is about to fall in place with their relationship to Yah.
Yeah, that's cool.
So any other questions on 14? This is pretty. This is the map I was telling you about. So this isn't, again, I cannot say this is 100% valid certain, but this was a neat map. This map was actually a Christian Canadian archaeologist.
Oh, wait.
Developed this. He studied it and looked at it, and he was like, and this is with this. I found this, and I was like, that's a different twist. I've always thought it was probably somewhere right in here. Could have been this. Could have been here. But according to his map, Succoth, Migdal, and Peria. That what was the Piario? Yeah, that one. That's actually right here. You can't see it on this map. The Piharioth. And see, here's Etham. And this is what he said. He said they went here, they got to Etham, and then God said, turn around and come back. So then they came back a little ways. And that was what you were talking about earlier when he was like, Pharaoh was like, what, are they confused? Maybe we need to go out. They don't know what they're doing. But I have always heard taught, more recently, that Mount Sinai, it was not where most people think it was. That it was actually closer over here, because this would have been the area where the Midianites were when Moses fled. Found Zipporah, and the Midian would have been over here. Well, where did he wind up when he was in Midian? He wound up on Mount Horeb.
Right.
That's where the burning bush was. That's eventually where they meet back as Sinai. So, it's interesting. This is the wilderness of Shur, the wilderness of Sin, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. Wilderness of Sinai. So I thought it was pretty neat. It's definitely something to kind of chew on and go, that's different than what I've always been taught. So, just a little interesting little diagram, and I can send it out so everybody can look at it. You kind of look at it. What's up, man?
It kind of looks like there's two Egypts. Is there?
So the boundary of Egypt was actually thought to be more right here. We always think of Egypt as right here, but in the ancient times, this could have possibly been more of the boundary of Egypt. So this would have been the boundary of Israel.
Egypt twice.
So this is
Just to
Egypt,
show
and this
you-
is also Egypt, just to
just
show you that
showing
all
you.
of that is there.
Where was the King's Highway?
So this right here, see this right
I
here?
see it there, yeah.
That would have been the king, and this is where the Philistines were.
Yeah, of course it would be right there along
And
the...
it's a lot
Yeah.
is that
shorter,
the,
too.
This is Gaza.
no, is that
What-
the water source? Is that
Yeah.
the...
This?
That white
up
line up
above it.
there is the king's side. They're yellow.
Oh, this?
Yeah,
Yeah, the Mediterranean.
Mediterranean. So
Yeah.
that's where it would be all the ports. And
Yep, all the ports, everything. So
Take that
that would have been the king's highway.
The Philistines, they worshipped the half fish, half man, right?
That was
Sus?
probably.
The,
That's gonna bother me.
When you remember, let us know. Yeah.
I just remember because they put the Ark of the Covenant next to it and it fell on its face.
All right. Any more questions? We'll keep going on to 15. Can I have somebody read? Can I have a volunteer?
Yes.
Somebody read one.
Dagon. Sorry.
Dagon,
Feel
okay.
better.
I need somebody to read 1 through 23.
Whoa.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, you can break it up.
I'll break it up.
1 through 10.
You want to take the first? I'll take the second.
Yep.
Okay.
Then Moses and the people of Israel sang this song to the Lord, saying, I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation.
He's become who?
My Yeshua.
Yeah.
This is my God, and I will praise him, my father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a man of war, the Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his host he cast into the sea, and his chosen officers were sunk in the Red Sea. The floods covered them, they went down into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, glorious in power, your right hand, O Lord, shatters the enemy. In the greatness of your majesty you overthrow your adversaries. You send out your fury, it consumes them like stubble. At the blast of your nostrils the waters piled up, the floods stood up in a heap. The deeps congealed in the heart of the sea.
Just think about that for a second. Pause for that a second.
Sounds like a
The
poem.
blast of your nostrils, right? So that's like, so he's telling us what the wind was.
Mm-hmm.
The wind was the ruach.
Oh, wow.
The ruach is what pushed those waters to the side.
Yep.
Anyways, continue on.
The enemy said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil, my desire shall have its fill of them. I will draw my sword, my hand shall destroy them. You blew with your wind, the sea covered them, they sank like lead in the mighty waters.
Ready?
Yep.
Who is like you, Adonai, among the gods? Who is like you, glorious in holiness, awesome in praises, doing wonders? You stretched out your right hand, and the earth swallowed them. You in your loving kindness led the people you have redeemed. You guided them in your strength to your holy habitation. And when the people hear, they will tremble. Anguish will seize the inhabitants of Philistia. Then the chiefs of Edom are terrified. Trembling grips Moab's mighty men. All of Canaan's inhabitants will melt away. Terror and dread will fall on them, and by the greatness of your arm they will become still as a stone, till your people cross over. Adonai, till the people whom you purchased crossed over. You bring them in and plant them in the mountain of your inheritance, the place, Adonai, that you have made, for yourself to dwell in, the sanctuary, Adonai, which your hands have prepared. Adonai will reign forever and ever. For Pharaoh's horses with his chariots and his horsemen went into the sea, but Adonai brought the waters of the sea back over them. Yet Israel walked in the midst of the sea on dry ground. Then Miriam the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out after her with tambourines and with dancing, as Miriam sang, Sing to Adonai, for he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider has thrown into the sea. He has thrown into the sea. And then Moses led Israel onward from the Sea of Reeds, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur. But they traveled 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink from the waters because they were bitter. On account of this, it was called Marah.
The word Marah actually means bitter. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, What shall we drink? Already. They're already grumbling. And he cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a log. And he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There the Lord made for them a statute and a rule, and there he tested them, saying, If you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God, and do that which is right in his eyes. In whose eyes? His eyes. And give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord your healer. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there by the water. So, this is really interesting. 12 springs, there's 70 trees there. So this is an oasis in the desert. In the middle of the desert. So, trees can represent people. They can represent nations. The word springs, we've talked about this before, is the word ayin in the Hebrew, and it can mean spring, fountain, well, but it can also mean understanding. And we talked about this when we saw Jacob meeting at the well. We saw Isaac get somebody sending for Isaac's bride, and they met at the well. We talked about this being understanding. So, who brings understanding? We're talking. So we are out of the literal sense of this, and now we're looking at the duality of this scripture. Who brings understanding?
Yep.
1 Corinthians 2, 9 through 12. But as it is written, what no eye has seen, nor ear has heard, nor the heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who love him, these things God has revealed to us through the Spirit. For the Spirit searches everything, even the depths of God. For who knows a person's thoughts except the spirit of that person which is in him? So also no one comprehends the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, that we might understand things freely given to us. So the Spirit brings understanding. So what does the water of the spring represent? Does anybody remember we talked about this? So we get the spring that represents understanding that the Spirit brings. The spring, though, is producing water. So what is the water? Do we remember what the water represents? Who is our living water? Yeshua. John 4, 13 through 14. I can't talk. Yeshua replied to her, everyone who drinks from this water will get thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him shall never be thirsty. The water that I give him will become a fountain of water within him, springing up to eternal life. So now we've got the Spirit bringing understanding that produces water, that is bringing the water of life to us, right? So 12 springs. What do we always think about when we think of 12?
Tribes.
The tribes. So we got 12 springs, are a picture of the 12 tribes. So what about these 70 trees?
70 elders.
70 elders, yep. There's a lot of scriptures that talk about 70. There's a few different things. How about 70 nations of the world?
Oh, yeah.
So we see the Spirit providing the Torah, Yeshua. Yeshua is the word from the beginning. Being given to the 12 tribes, Israel, and then distributed to the nations. So with that, where's the pattern? We always talk about where's the pattern. Where do we see this again? Luke 10, 1 and 2. Now after these things, the Lord assigned 70 others and sent them out by twos before him in every town and place where he himself was about to go. And he was telling them, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Therefore, beg the Lord of the harvest to send out the workers into his harvest. So Yeshua gave his word to the 12 disciples, Israel, and then it was distributed to the nations through 70. So we need the Spirit to bring understanding of Torah so we, spiritual Israel, can distribute it to the nations. Oh, that was kind of cool. It's always, when I see, you see little things like that, and like, why was it so specific that there was 12 springs, 70 trees? It's like, oh, it's an oasis. Yeah, there's got to be more for it being that specific. And with those numbers, 12, 70, springs, water.
I love that there's like 3 to 4 different ways to always look at
Mm-hmm.
Just
Absolutely. I mean, where would we be if we literally just read the Bible just for face value? And there's so much that we would miss out without seeing the parallels and the different things that it puts in there. Any questions on chapter 15?
just do a number search on 70. The
Oh,
amount of
70,
scriptures
yeah.
is insane.
The 70 is pretty crazy. The amount of stuff that's 70. And the amount of stuff you see all over. It's not really just isolated into one area either. Alright, let's keep going into 16 then. I'm going to take a sip of my coffee. They set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the people of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had parted from the land of Egypt. So how long has it been? Somebody do the math for me. Do you remember when they left, where they're at now?
Oh man.
Somebody do the math.
It won't be me.
How long has it been? This is actually really easy.
What did they do?
Exactly. You got to know that one first.
I don't know where they live.
What day did they depart out of Egypt?
On the 14th.
Did they?
Well, the 15th.
The
They just
15th.
done having Passover.
So the Passover was on the night of the 14th. So the 15th would have started their journey out. So they started on the first month on the 15th day. Now we're on the
One month.
1 month. Second month, 15 days. It's been 1 month. It's been 1 month.
Hey, it was you.
It was me. No, it wasn't.
And the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the people of Israel said to them, "Would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full. For you have brought us into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." So we sit back and we think about the fact that Israel is free from the oppression of Egypt, but they are complaining and want to go back. Like, we're sitting here looking at this, you've been freed, you're no longer under the oppression, but now they're saying, can we just go back? Like, it would have been better for us to be there. Why? Why are they acting like this?
Because they've been camping for a month.
They've been camping for a month. So this is the journey that the Lord took me on yesterday about the convenience of oppression.
Ooh.
Wow.
The convenience of oppression.
All have our toes done.
So let me tell you, my toes got stepped on hard. So I want to let's walk this out, because this I believe is almost more relevant today than it was in their time. So I think we see modern examples of this with domestic violence cases. People should leave, but they're going back. So I did a little bit of studying on the psychological side of domestic violence. And this is what I found. Anybody ever heard of the Stockholm Syndrome?
Yep.
Yes.
So if you haven't, the Stockholm Syndrome is a psychological condition that occurs when a victim of abuse identifies and attaches or bonds positively with their abuser. This syndrome was originally observed when hostages who were kidnapped not only bonded with their kidnappers, but also fell in love with them. Then there's also
Beauty and the Beast.
Beauty and the Beast, yes. Beauty and the Beast, trauma-based.
Trauma-based.
All right, so there's also an issue, the psychological thing called trauma bonding. And trauma bonding occurs when a person experiencing abuse develops an unhealthy attachment to their abuser. They may rationalize or defend the abusive actions, feel a sense of loyalty, isolate from others, and hope that the abuser's behavior will change.
Wow.
So survivors sometimes want the abuse to end, but not the relationship.
Right.
So does that sound familiar? That's exactly what we're reading.
Yep.
The Egyptians didn't want to be in bondage. They didn't want to be under their oppression. But they had bonded with Egypt. Remember when we started out studying about this, we talked about how the Israelites came and were sojourners in the land of Egypt. They got put in Goshen. And then the next Torah portion, it started out with, and Israel settled in the land. Then we read a couple chapters later, and it talked about now the Israelites were all intermixed in the land of Egypt. They were no longer just in the land of Goshen. So they had created a bond with Egypt.
Wow.
And I put this, they had lost their holiness. What does the word holy mean?
Set apart.
Set apart. They had lost that. They were no longer set apart in the land of Goshen.
Which
They
would
had-
explain when God came and did the thing in Ezekiel.
Yes.
They
had gotten intermixed. They were beginning probably to worship their idols. There would have been a lack of separation between their character and the character of Egypt.
And also, it's easier for them. They don't have to work as hard. It's
Yep.
just like prisoners who are released and go back out into society.
Yep.
And they find it is hard to find jobs. It's hard to find housing, whatever. It's easier just to make a crime and go back to prison and stay there where they're fed, bed,
Yeah.
work out, watch TV.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything's taken care of.
So oppression may be awful, but let's look at that. Let's look at the characteristics of oppression in Egypt. Okay? So these are the things that oppression was. Oppression was consistent. Every day, they knew exactly what was happening. They knew exactly what their job was. Every day was, day by day, the exact same thing. So it's consistent. It meant you were taken care of. Verse 16:3 said that they sat by meat pots and had bread to their fill. So they were taken care of.
What are meat pots?
Lots of meat.
Pots of meat.
It just sounds gross.
Mary?
It's like spam.
Not canned meat.
Oh, pot
Canned meat.
Potted
Pots of
meat.
meat. It was probably like it probably had been salted and preserved, and they had it in pots, covered pots, so
Jerky.
they kept the bugs off of it. But they had shelter. They lived in the land of Goshen. They had houses, right?
Goshen seemed to be pretty nice.
There would have been less stress. You know, you might be like, "How is it less stress?" We're going to see that in just a second. It was convenient. It was very convenient for them, and again, we're going to see this in a second. So let's parallel that to now. Let's look at now they're in quote unquote freedom. So they've been released. So what was the characteristics of their freedom?
Chaos.
It was inconsistent.
Move with the cloud.
And they moved to the cloud.
That's right.
They weren't supposed to move until the cloud moved.
You
so
never know.
You might camp here for 3 or 4 days and then move, and then you get over here, and the next day, oh, we got to move again.
What
Which
we
means
just
they
here?
gotta set
What
up
were
and
we-
tear down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Set up
and tear
just
set
down.
up and tear
Just
down.
Set up and tear down.
I mean, think about that.
They're tense.
So they only got their daily bread. We're gonna look here in a minute. The Lord provided them, but they only got what they needed for that day. Whereas before they had pots of meat. They had canned meat to their desires. They had spam sandwiches all
They
day
did
long.
not have spam.
Spam and eggs.
Right? Shelter was a luxury. So I got thinking about it. Before they had stone, mud huts, houses. If they had to get ready that quick to get out of there, how many of them do you think may not have even had a tent when they left? Like they're just like, let's go, let's get out.
Well, it's not like we have today where we have camping tents that we can pack away and
Stop
go.
by the quick Walmart, grab a
They-
tent, no.
Yeah, they don't have that.
No. So this would have been very stressful. Fear of the unknown. This would have been xenophobia to the max. They don't know. They have no idea what's going to happen. All they have is to be able to trust in Yah.
And I mean, out in the wilderness, there's like wild animals.
Yeah. And it was inconvenient. It was inconvenient for them to have to think about the food, to have to think about shelter. All these things they now had to think about would have been super convenient. So this is not a rhetorical question. How can we see this in our world today? I mean, how can we see this in our world today? I mean, let's just think about the pandemic that we were just in, right? Is it more convenient for people to go to work or sit on their butts at home and collect this check that they're getting from the government?
Yep.
I mean, I think every business can tell you the answer to that question. People don't want to work. They don't want to go to work. It's more convenient. Oh, why would I go to work? I can just sit here.
They can make more money at home.
Exactly. There's so many. I mean, our governmental system was designed to make it more convenient for you to stay locked into their system than to be able to flourish on your own.
Stimulus checks.
Yeah.
Stimulus checks, government assistance.
Yep. So here's some lessons that we can see in this. When it's time for Yah to lead you into the promises, it's going to be inconvenient.
Ooh.
Yikes.
It's going to be inconvenient.
Olivia's like, no.
Right? There are going to be things that you have to lay down.
Uh-oh.
There's going to be. And this is a tough one. There are going to be bonds you have to break.
Erica's face.
Right? You are going to get uncomfortable walking into God's promises. And the journey into God's promises is going to be uncomfortable. And I put a quote in there because this is what the Lord told Abby years ago. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
At the kitchen sink. I need you to become comfortable
With being uncomfortable.
You
Yah.
said, please no.
But here's some hope. Yah wants you to be set apart to avoid this. The more you set yourself apart now, as you get closer to the promises of Yah, there's less bonds you have to break. There's less things that you're going to have to lay down. There is going to be less uncomfortable if you begin the process now. The problem was Israel left the place where they were set apart and began to get sucked into Egypt. So then when he wanted to bring them into the promises, he had to break all of that loose before he could get them into the promises. So I guess what I'm saying is start now. Set yourself apart. Break off bonds. Get uncomfortable. Go ahead and prep yourself. Start enjoying being uncomfortable. Because let me tell you, it's just as soon as you get to the place where you start to get comfortable, there's another thorn that's going to come into your side, and you're going to get uncomfortable again as God walks you through another aspect of getting closer to His promises. Did you get your picture?
I did.
And I'll have all these slides posted as well. All right, so continuing on in the portion. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I am about to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not." So here we go. He's testing them again. "On the 6th day, when they bring what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily." So the first test that we saw earlier was just a simple obedience. He said, "I'm testing them in this," and he laid out some terms of his covenant. He said, obey them. Right? So what is this test about?
Sabbath?
Sabbath! Yes!
Hey.
The Sabbath. So this is the second test he puts on them. The second test. They haven't even gotten, quote unquote, the Torah yet. And nothing's been written down. They haven't got to Sinai yet. And he's already testing them in Sabbath. I think that's very, 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 very clear.
Wow.
What the importance of Sabbath is to him. The first thing he said was obey my commandments. The next thing he says is my Sabbath. Honor my Sabbath.
Huh.
So Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, "At evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against the Lord. For what are we that you grumble against us?" So Moses is telling them, look, you might have thought you were grumbling against me, but you were grumbling against the Lord. And we're going to look at that in a little bit too. Oh, actually, right now, look at this. "And Moses said, when the Lord gives you in the evening meat to eat, and in the morning bread to the full, because the Lord has heard your grumbling, that you grumble against him, what are we? Your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord." Because Moses was acting in Yah's authority. So they were grumbling against Moses. But Moses points out, look, you may think you're grumbling against me, but I'm just acting in Yah's authority. So you're not grumbling against me, you're grumbling against him. Then Moses said to Aaron, "Say to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, come near before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling." And as soon as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. They're like, oh, let's go. There's the cloud. We got to follow the cloud. Time for us to pick up. This is inconvenient for us. All right, somebody want to read 11 through 20? 11 through 20. Olivia, you want to read for us?
Here, you want my version? With nicer names?
And the Lord said to Moses, "I have heard the grumbling of the people of Israel. Say to them at twilight, you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God." In the evening quail came up and covered the camp, and in the morning dew lay around the camp. And when the dew had gone up, there was a face of the wilderness, a fine flake-like thing, fine as frost on the ground. When the people of Israel saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?"
What is that?
For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "Is it the bread that the Lord has given you to eat?" This is what the Lord had commanded. "Gather of it, each one of you, as much as he can eat. You shall take an omer according to the number of the persons that each of you has in his tent." And the people of Israel did so. They gathered some more, some less,
But when they measured it with an omer, whoever gathered much had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. Each of them gathered as much as he could eat. And Moses said to them, "Let no one leave any of it over until the morning." But they did not listen to Moses. Some left part of it till the morning, and it bred worms and stank. And Moses was angry with them.
Oh my gosh. Of course they didn't listen. Why would they listen? I do think it's crazy. But when they measured it with an omer, so they're supposed to take an omer according to the number of persons. So for every person, they should have taken an omer, right?
It would have been 7.
So, but it's crazy that whoever gathered much had nothing left over, and whoever gathered little had no lack. So it always equaled out what they needed.
That's cool.
And it all, the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread. Give me exactly what I need for today. So it didn't matter. It always worked out to be exactly what they needed. It was a perfect sign of his provisions. But remember this part where it says, some left part of it till the morning, and it bred worms and stank. Just keep that in mind as we continue on. Morning by morning they gathered it, each as much as he could eat. But when the sun grew hot, it melted. On the 6th day they gathered twice as... That's interesting because I always wondered what happened with the stuff that didn't gather. I was always like...
It melted.
It melted. It was like it was snow. It just went back into the ground. On the 6th day they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers each. And when all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, he said to them, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake, and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over lay aside to be kept till the morning." So they laid it all aside until the morning, and Moses commanded them, and it did not stink, and there were no worms in it. So wait a second. What's so magical about this 6th day that they can actually keep it over? So Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday goes, if they got to eat the next morning, it's got worms and it stinks. But now, on this 7th day, what's left till morning is still perfectly fine. And something even more miraculous is going to show up in a second. So this was a complete miracle that this happened. Moses said, "Eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, which is the Sabbath, there will be none." On the 7th day, some of the people went out to gather, but they found none. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath." Key thing there, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. "Therefore, on the 6th day, he gives you bread for 2 days. Remain each of you in his place. Let no one go out of his place on the 7th day." So the people rested on the 7th day. Now the house of Israel called its name Manna. And the word manna actually, it means, what is it?
What is it?
So they called it manna because that's what they said. They went out and were like, they actually went outside and were like, manna. And somebody was like, what's what we're going to call it? We don't know what it is. It was like coriander seed, white. And the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. That sounds delicious.
Can I have that for like breakfast?
I know, right? Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Let an omer..." You want to talk about a big miracle? "Let an omer of it be kept throughout your generations, so that they may see the bread with which I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt." And Moses said to Aaron, "Take a jar and put an omer of manna in it and place it before the Lord to be kept throughout your generations."
Whoa.
As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron placed it before the testimony to be kept. This is eventually what's placed in the ark. So eventually we're going to see, once they build the tabernacle, they create the Ark of the Covenant. This omer of manna is placed in the ark with these other things, with Aaron's rod. It talks about the stone tablets. So somewhere on the earth, I believe, that there's still an omer of manna somewhere still to be found that I would love to...
That nobody should touch.
Correct.
Please don't touch it.
I just want to see it. I want to be like, it's still there. It's still there.
It's not molded.
Thousands of years later.
Doesn't have worms in it.
Which is really cool because, like, in Egyptian tombs, they found seed, they found grain
Yeah.
that they took and they planted and sprouted and it grew. So
Coriander seed.
Oh yeah. Coriander's a pretty cool little thing.
coriander seed.
Except white.
It was like
Don't touch
coriander
that.
seed,
That
so
hurts.
like that, but probably pure white, like snow.
Coriander seed is when cilantro goes to seed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys
Yeah.
read that. Pretty cool.
Which is interesting because we talked about the Passover and the hyssop, and the hyssop is actually apparently in the same family as
Coriander or cilantro?
cilantro.
Or some people call it just all coriander, like even when it's green.
Nice, so go sit down, please.
What do you need?
So verse 35, the people of Israel ate manna for 40 years till they came to a habitable land. They ate the manna till they came to the border of the land of Canaan. An omer is just random verse at the end. An omer is the 10th part of an ephah. Any questions on 16?
Did they get meat every night?
Every night. The meat came in the evening, manna came in the morning.
Oh. You're a little bit.
But, I mean, for
Same
40
two
years.
foods, though.
I don't know, though. So anybody that's worked at Chick-fil-A knows, for some reason, you don't really get tired of the Chick-fil-A food.
Because
I
they
never
put
did.
MSG in it. That is why you're not tired of it.
This is heavenly food.
Heavenly.
Heavenly.
White and coriander taste like wafers of honey.
You get waffles for breakfast. You
Waffles.
could make chicken and waffles.
Chicken and waffles. Quail and waffles.
Quail and waffles.
Quail and waffles. All right, let's take a little 5-minute break. All right, let's keep going. Exodus 17 now. This is the last chapter for the portion. Verse 1. All the congregation of the people of Israel moved on from the wilderness of Sin by stages according to the commandment of the Lord and camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." And Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" So this word test is in the Hebrew actually means to judge. And it's really like an act of usurping. Like it is like they were basically like, to test the Lord here is a little bit more than just testing him.
So wait, were they at the Oasis?
No, this is,
No, before.
they moved.
I
They've
just-
moved on.
They're at the Rephidim.
Right
Yeah.
now, they just moved.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I just making
Now they're at
sure.
Rephidim.
All right.
But the people thirsted there for water, and the people grumbled against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" So Moses cried to the Lord, "What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me." And I love some of this stuff. And the Lord said to Moses, "Pass on before the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go." So he took elders of Israel. These would have been the leaders. These would have been people that were appointed, right? And he took his staff. So there's two things that are mentioned in the scripture, which I thought were pretty interesting.
Are they going on retreat?
So, yeah, right? So,
Team building exercise.
a staff is a sign of authority. It's like a king's scepter. Like it's his sign of his authority. "Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink." And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the name of that place Massah and Meribah because of the quarreling of the people of Israel, and because they tested the Lord by saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" That's a bold statement. But what makes this statement even stronger is that this phrase "among us" actually translates "within us." So they're like, so is the Lord within us or not? And we obviously see that right now he's not. The way they're acting, he is not. And as we get into the wilderness farther, when we get into Leviticus, when we get into the tabernacle, I know I've said this 100 times, but we're going to get into this idea of Shekan Tevek, that it is the Lord's desire to dwell within us. But as of this point, they're not. So we see a lot of grumbling and complaining against Moses and his authority. So I want to touch a little bit on submitting to authority. And this is a very touchy subject because this is something that gets abused way too often. So I want to I want to talk about it, make some things clear about it, and bring some clarity and understanding to this. So, first question, is it wrong to question authority? Is it wrong to question authority?
I would say no.
No. It's not wrong to question authority. I think a lot of us have been taught that it's wrong to question authority.
Yeah.
I had the hardest time growing up in the church because I was taught you don't question authority. That's the Lord's man. And even in a family setting, you don't question dad. Like, you don't question authority. You don't question police officers. You don't question it. But is it wrong? No. Is it wrong to grumble against authority?
Yes.
Yes. Right? We know that all authority is given by Yah, Romans 13:1. But why is it so important in the assembly of Yah not to grumble against authority? So we know that all authority is given to Yah, right? But it's even stronger. It's even more, divisive in the actual assembly. So it's one thing for you so you don't respect authority out there. It's a totally different ballgame to not respect authority in here.
Or wherever.
Or wherever you are,
assembled.
yes. Right? James 3:1. The next couple of verses are like, these are ones we'll talk about. James 3:1 says, "Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness." 1 Timothy 4:16, "Keep a close watch on yourself and on the teaching. Persist in this, for by doing so, you will save both yourself and your hearers." Again, he's talking to Timothy. The whole letter to Timothy was written about the assembly and function within the assembly. And I put this. These are two verses that I lose sleep over. Excuse me. Because I'm standing up here teaching. Like, I am the leader, I don't even like that word, of this ministry. And this scares the daylights out of me. These two verses is what keeps me humble and keeps me seeking after Him constantly to make sure that I do this right. Hebrews 13:17, "Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they watch over your souls as one who must give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with groaning, for that would be of no benefit of you." And I've seen this verse taken out of context and abused so many times. So when I read this, I was like, I want to break this verse down. I want to see what this verse actually means. This word obey, if you look at it in the Greek, means to put confidence in. It means to assure them or to build them up. I was like, that doesn't sound like obey at all. And then we have the word submit. So those are the two words that are always used. Obey and submit, right? Submit means to yield, to put oneself under. And I wrote this as a little side note. When you are under something, you feel the weight of that thing. So then it goes on to say, they watch over your soul. This word soul is suke in the Greek. It means breath of life. And the Hebrew crossover for that, what the Hebrew word would be, is phago. And this is what I found in the little help section of the study notes. The soul is the direct aftermath of God breathing or blowing His gift of life into a person, making them an ensouled being. So in this verse, it says, put confidence in your leader and feel the weight that they're under. Because they're watching after your life. They're watching after that breath of life to make sure that you stay on the right path. And so I was thinking about this. And I was like, man, we have so in the modern church, there's so many places where people abuse this, and they're like, obey me, obey me, obey me, and they're not even worried about your soul. They're worried about your obedience. They're not worried about your soul. They're not worried about your life. They're worried about your obedience. So I put this reworked. This is that verse reworked. Put confidence in your leaders and feel the weight of what they are under, because they are keeping the breath of life in you and will give an account of that before Yah. So I just want to bring that up because we see here in Israel that they're doing, God is bringing them through all this stuff, and then all they can do is turn around and grumble, and they complain, and they're rising up against Moses. We'll see later people actually rise up against Moses and Aaron, and it does not turn out good for them. So I bring that up about submitting to authority, not to say, hey, obey me. I don't care about you obeying me at all. I bring it up to say, just understand that what goes in to coming into a Friday night sometimes keeps me awake at night. Because that I understand the weight of what's on my shoulders for standing up here teaching you guys. So do not think that I ever take that lightly. Never. So let's jump back into the portion. Then Amalek, because this starts this whole little other story, which is kind of neat. Then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. So Moses said to Joshua, choose for us men and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed, and whenever he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hand grew weary, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side. So his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, write this as a memorial in a book and recite it in the ears of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under the heaven. And Moses built an altar there and named it, The Lord is my banner, saying, a hand upon the throne of the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Any questions on chapter 17? And I think it's interesting that we see this at the end of this story. After we see them not submitting to authority, then we see their willingness to help support their authority that was there before them. Because Moses knew he couldn't do that forever on his own. To hold up, I mean, you can hold up your hands for a little while. But there's a war going on.
Hours and hours.
Eventually, come out to F3 and do some rock and nightclubs for a while. You get really tired. Just